There. In the last video I did on Smyrna, in the second half, and it was a really long video, I touched on the matter of rewards, and I'm going to do a kind of a study on this soon. I really believe that we need to purge from ourselves this meritorious works approach to rewards. Now, I do believe in rewards, but I don't think they're for what we think they are typically, and I don't think that they are what we think they are. And I was thinking about the crown of life again last night. I really believe that based on what I see in the scriptures on the two references to the crown of life, that they are something that we can have here in this. The crown of life is something that we can have here in this age. Because, number one, it's inserted into the body of the letter in the church at Smyrna before the mention of he who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches, and the reward to the overcomer is listed. Just like in Laodicea, he says, he opens the doors and let me in, I will come in and sup with him. That's a promise for this life. If it's put in the body of the letter before the promise to the overcomer and before that critical phrase, he who has an ear, let him hear, it's part of this life. That's just kind of how I see those break down. I don't know if you know that the letters to the seven churches have two different outline forms, and the first three, the reward to the overcomer is put at the end of the letter, and the last four, the reward to the overcomer, is put in the letter, because those four each have a mention of the Lord's coming, which means that there's a chance that you could live to see it and receive your reward essentially in this life, at the end of this life, when he transfigures us. But the crown of life is placed, it's not even associated with one of the rewards to the overcomers, it's just put right into the body of the letter. And then James says that the one who endures temptations will receive a crown of life. And I don't get the sense that that means at the Bema seat, way down the road, you're going to have that as one of a crown that you're going to be given. No, I believe the crown of life has to do when you go through a trial and you come out the other side and you've been disciplined and tried and you've learned something of the Lord. There's always a peaceable fruit of righteousness that comes out of it. There's a sense of renewing and refreshing. There is a fresh oil and a shine on you. And I think it's the same as saying he's the glory and the lifter of my head. He is my salvation, and I'm experiencing him as such. Christ is being magnified in my body. All of that to me is the crown of life. And this is a crown we already have, because he's I believe that it is just the life exalted in us, the life of Christ. We've received the life of Christ, and we're to glorify him in our bodies. So anyway, when it comes to this meritorious works concept, I've always been around Christians, the grace ones will say, well, you know, a lot of these passages that you're looking at aren't talking about salvation, they're talking about reward. And we should endeavor to seek to gain rewards. And they say that this is the motivator for holiness in the Christian life, is seeking rewards. And it never did sit right with me. Today it doesn't sit right with me because I don't agree with it from what I see in the scriptures. But in the past it didn't sit right with me because it never motivated me. It only condemned me. It did the same thing to me that thinking I was in trouble with the pastor did. You know, I always felt, and I'm like that in my life, I do things, I cannot be motivated by reward. Like, you can't tell me, hey, I'll pay you $1 million if you work at a 4 years at this job you hate. I don't think I could do it. I do what I love to do. And I'm the kind of person that, if you love what you're doing, you'll never work a day in your life. That's just how I'm made. And I found out that my biological parents were like that too. So now I don't feel so bad about it. I used to think I was lazy, but no, I'm designed to just, I do things because I love to do them without really thinking about the future and what it's going to turn into. I'm not one of those people that can really be motivated by, if you do this for X amount of time, I'll give you this. I'm like, I'm not doing that. How do I know that you're going to give me that? And number one. And number two, that's tomorrow. I live today. So that's not, in some ways it's like, is that wise? Well, it's wise to trust the Lord. It would be foolish if I didn't trust the Lord, but He's provided for me abundantly. Anyway, so no, the concept of working for reward has never motivated me. It's only put fear in me. So no, I don't see it for me as a motivator to holiness, nor do I see it as the motivator of the Christian life. I believe that the motivator of the Christian life is the enjoyment of the Lord. We want to deal with our conscience, and we want to satisfy our conscience and come into the presence of the Lord, because at His right hand there's pleasures forevermore, and when we're in Him we find peace. And He's sure to bring us through all kinds of situations to show us that there is no peace or joy outside of Him. And as we find our comfort in Him, we begin to realize that we love talking about the Lord or different things. I mean, I think everybody's made differently, but I love to talk about the Lord. I love to talk about the Word. It renews my spirit. It brings me into fellowship with others, and I have a thirst for that fellowship. And that was the motivator of the apostles, by the way. I've said this many times, but 1 John says, these things we write to you that you may have fellowship with us, and truly our fellowship is with the Father and with His Son, Jesus Christ. Look at the thirst for fellowship that drove their ministry. Remember Jesus at the well. He was thirsty, and He asked the woman at the well to give him a drink, and then He started talking about the real water. And He fellowshiped with her and brought her into a realization of that she doesn't have to be a Jew in Jerusalem keeping the law. She can worship Him wherever she is. She can worship the Father. He's going to give her living water, a fountain that will spring up into her unto eternal life, right? And at the end of that, she's all excited and wins the whole time to the Lord. But the apostles come and say, Lord, aren't you hungry? We went to go get food. He said, no, I have a food that you don't know of, to do the will of God. He was nourished through that whole fellowship with her and satisfied. That's why we serve the living God, is because it's satisfying to do so. It's our fellowship, it's our enjoyment, it's a foretaste of the age to come. It's a pledge from the Spirit when we get renewed and we taste Him. And it brings us into fellowship with each other, which we're thirsty and hungry for. All we're doing is eating and drinking Christ. You say, well, personal satisfaction, that's not the right motive. Well, Jesus presented God as satisfaction. Remember, God said the great sin is that people have forsaken Him and He's the fountain of living water. They've carved out cisterns, that don't hold water. And He said, come to me and buy without price, and I'll give you milk and honey. With Him is the satisfaction. The sin is going to something else for satisfaction. What about reward? What if your concept is, well, if I work hard, the Lord will reward me? Sorry, I'm allergies. See what I'm saying? Okay, now, scripturally, from Romans 4, we're clearly told that to him who works not, the reward is reckoned as grace and not as a debt. And we're told through Romans that it's either of grace or it's of works. There's no mingling. And if you are of works, you are in the flesh. That's pretty consistent through Paul's thing. If you try to put God in your debt by working, you put yourself under the law and you put yourself in the flesh. So I cannot see a meritorious exchange system where I exchange my work for reward as if I'm working for mammon as scriptural. And then through the Gospels, in the parables, somebody reminded me the other day of, at the end of when Jesus comes to establish his throne and he separates the sheep from the goat nations, the sheep, he says, when you clothed me, you fed me, you visited me, right? And they said, when did we do these things? And he said, well, when you did it to the least of my brethren, you did it unto me. But I thought that was an interesting example of unconsciously serving the Lord and not knowing you're doing it. That is their sense. They're surprised. I'm not saying that there's no reward. What I'm saying is that I don't believe we're going to be rewarded for things that we think we are. And if we're doing it under the motive for reward, chances are we're building with wood, hay, and stubble because it puts us in the flesh. Remember, I mentioned it, but in Luke, the parable where he said, likewise, when you've done everything you're supposed to do, consider yourself an unprofitable servant because you're only doing what is required. You really think you're profitable to the Lord? Profit is different than just doing what's required. Profit means you actually expand on what the Lord has so that he's richer because he has you. If you serve somebody and you've come up with a new way to do their business so that they increase in their profits because of your idea, and they have more than they would have if they hadn't had you, then you're profitable. If you just do what's expected, you're just a cost of doing business. They've got to have, let's say you're an IT guy, they have to have their computers fixed. You're a liability. They have to pay you, but it'd be nicer if they didn't have to have their computers fixed. And they always realize that too when it's time to start looking at their budget. The bottom line, the IT guys all get lined up with boxes and say, well, we're going to let go of 30% of you. That's why I can't do IT anymore. But anyway, the point I'm making is that we're not profitable to the Lord, and he does not reward us on the basis of profitability. He rewards us out of the goodness of his heart. Remember the parable of the talents. The 11th hour laborer. Everybody got the same wage, and when the people who worked the longest and the hardest said this isn't fair, they got the same wage we did and they only worked at the end of the race here, he said, is your eye evil because I'm good? In other words, and he says it's my prerogative to give what I want to whoever I want. And that is the basis of the rewards, his generosity. And remember, he said he's looking for opportunities to give rewards to people who give a glass of water to a disciple in the name of Jesus. It's going to be completely different than anything we think, There is possibility of loss of rewards if you build only with wood, hay, and stubble and you damage the building. Damaging the building is a big deal. Through divisiveness, through setting up a system of air that brings people into confusion, those are fairly extreme cases in some, and yet they're becoming the norm in Christianity today. It's all wood, hay, and stubble. Still, though, I believe he's looking for any opportunity to wink at people in that day. And now, really, the reward is Christ himself. All the so-called crowns and everything he gives to the overcomers are made of the incorruptible life. They all point to himself as the resurrection of the life and his incorruptible nature. if you give me something less than Christ himself, that is not a reward. And we have these materialistic concepts like, oh, he's building me a big mansion and I'm gonna have a bigger mansion and you're gonna be down by the trash heap, you're the garbage man. No, we're not gonna care about that. If you're incorruptible and you're fully satisfied, wherever you are is heaven. So it's not about a material thing where you get this and that. What we want is Christ himself. He is our reward. And if you give me something less than Christ and say, oh, this is your reward, I'm going to be like, yeah, well, okay, I'll put that over here, but I'm going after Christ. In that day, for sure. So I believe that the rewards have to do with Christ himself. And they are given out as he shares himself with his body out of his kindness. And then you say, well, we're rewarded for our work, because even Paul said, Paul planted, Apollos watered, God gave the increase, but each receives a reward for his work. Fine. But Paul said, I work more than they all, and yet not I, but the grace of God in me. And there's 3 statements where Paul says, not I, but something else. Not I, but Christ. Not I, but the sin that dwells in my flesh. Or not I working, but the grace of God in me. And in Ephesians, it says that he's given gifts to the body, and he's given each one a measure of faith according to the gift of Christ. And he's tempered the body and put it together in a way that fulfills his purpose. And each of us can only do what the Lord works in us. Anything else is wood, hay, and stubble. Only that which is the grace of God working in me to produce is going to be something that can pass through fire and abide in that day. And anything that doesn't pass through the fire isn't even going to be mentioned, because it's just going to be burned off. We'll never even think about it. But what remains, having been built of incorruptible material, which is the life of Christ himself, will be our reward. It'll be our shining. And yes, some people will shine more brightly than others, apparently, because Paul said, he fashions some like in resurrection, some are going to shine like the moon, some like the stars. That's all his creative grace and his predestination. And in the end, you don't have much to say about it, because all you did was enjoy as much Christ as you could in this life, and whatever you had abided. And that was based on the measure of the gift of Christ that was given to you as a member of the body. We think so individualistically, but God is tempering a body together, and some he seemingly has given a little, and some he's given a lot, and yet he says the last will be first and the first will be last. So it'll all be flipped upside down anyway. But the point I'm making is that even your service that is rewarded is entirely of the grace of God. That's why we're going to lay our crowns at his feet, because we're going to recognize that this is all Christ. It's his reward. He is our substitution in every area. He is our righteousness. He's our sanctification. He's our hope of glory. He is our life. And ultimately, he is the one who is crowned with all the crowns. And then if we have crowns, it's because he has generously shared himself and his reward with us. It says he comes and his reward is with him. Whose reward? His reward. And yet he gives it to us, but it's strictly out of his kindness and generosity. And I think it'll be very personalized. We'll cast our crowns at his feet, but it's personalized, because even the overcomers, there's the white stone, and everybody gets one, but it has a name on it which no one knows except they and the Lord. That's very personal. And so there's a memorial taste, I think, of our life that will be between us and the Lord, which will be our eternal enjoyment and reward. But I don't think we're going to be measuring against each other and say, he got the gold and I only got the silver, and he got the bronze and that guy got nothing. I don't think that's the way it's going to be at all. There's not going to be a hierarchical system in heaven, ultimately, because he's going to deliver up the kingdom to the Father, and it says God will be all in all. If there's a thought of position and rank, that is in this creation. And I think that's all going to kind of go away once the whole new heavens and the new earth comes in. It's going to be a whole new deal. And I know that God is not going to withhold his presence from some and give it to others. That's just not the way it's going to be. So I just think we need to rethink this thing. What motivates the Christian life? It's really the satisfaction we have in him that immediately motivates us to want to speak about him as an overflow of our enjoyment of him, period. Beyond that, I really don't think, because how could Paul get to a point where he said, look, I don't even judge myself anymore, if he was continually thinking about the reward? Now, he did say, I buffet my body so that after preaching others, I don't want to be cast off, but that means I don't want to be disqualified for service in this life. That's my life. My enjoyment is to serve him. I don't want to lose that. You can get yourself into such a position that you can't even really serve the Lord in a good conscience because your life is such a mess, you know. So, yeah, just something to think about, a little more about the rewards. And I'll talk to you later.